Greetings and salutations, Geo Nerds. Today we're going to look at Gari, the largest sand island in the world that has reverted back to its original name from Fraser Island and Great Sandy Island and Indian Head back to its original name. Anyway, we're going to look at a bit of sand mining, some tourism of course, some beautiful places, some forestry history. Hang in there, it's going to be interesting. Let's do this together. Well, here we are, folks, up above Kumbuka, of course. And we're going to spin around, head through the city, but we got a little wiggle waggle. We've been cleared for supersonic flight, which we probably just went through. And because we've got to head up to, up north here to Gari, formerly known as Fraser Island. A beautiful place, an absolutely beautiful place. Crawled all around there when I was a kid. If I can find the photos, I might throw a few in at the end. Very skinny T-rocks. Anyway, here it is, the world's biggest sand island. You actually have to count it, and that area in front of us there is called Kalula. It's pretty much the same place, just the fact that there's a break there at Tinskip Point now doesn't really mean much. It's all sand. It's been here a long time. There's sand mining down there, just on the beach, the sand mining area. We'll just flip over to the inside. Kingfisher Bay, an absolutely beautiful place. Didn't exist when I was going up there. And so, yeah, it's very ecologically sensitive, beautiful place. And down here, just pull back. Speaking of ecologically sensitive, there's Mackenzie's Old Wharf. Anyway, let's get into it. Well, folks, here we have a nice Queensland Globe flyby. That's Double Island Point down there, which is essentially part of Gari. That little hole there wasn't always there. That turned it into an island. So Hook Point and Inskip Point didn't exist. Big long beach, you're looking at all the sand mining there. This island is about 250 k's north of Brisbane. And it's a significant island. It's the largest sand island in the world. It's about 123 kilometres long, about 22 k's wide at its widest point, and it's 1,840 square kilometres. So it's a fairly big island. Lots of lakes, some beautiful lakes. We'll have a look at those in a bit. And some of the history of those lakes. There's Indian Head there, there's Waddy Point, Middle Rocks, and Nigala Rocks just there. We're coming up to the tip of the island here, which is Sandy Cape. And the lighthouse is just back there a little bit. You can see the white patch where it is. And here's the shoals at the top. It's claimed a lot of ships, these shoals, because you just can't nip around the top end of Gari. I've got to stop thinking of it as Fraser. Let's have a look at the geology. So here we have, and guess what? It's sand. All of it. Different types of sand, but sand. We'll talk about the mineral content of the sand a little further in. This is Double Island Point. That's andesite. And that's, it's andesite, I'm sorry. Jurassic andesite. And here we are up at Indian Head and Middle Rocks and Waddy Point. And that's trachyte, the same stuff the Glasshouse Mountains are made of. So the trachyte up here at Indian Head is about 28 million years old. Yet the andesite down at Double Island Point is 160 million years old. There's 130 million years between these two rocks. Yet they look very similar. Well, they don't if you look closely. But yeah, you don't get them confused. They're both very hard volcanic rocks. Fraser Island is sitting on 100 metres of sand. There's 100 metres of sand from the waterline down to the basement volcanic rocks. And some of the dunes are 230, 240 metres high. So there is an absolute metric gigaton of sand here. And of course that sand contains certain minerals that we find valuable and attractive. So let's see what happens in a bit. I think I might talk about timber first though, because we'll go from the top down. Now, these fellas have been here a long time, at least 5,000 years, because before then it wasn't an island, it was connected to the part of the mainland. They've been here that long. There's some of their dwellings. See the coast in the background there. This is from before the 1900s, very old photograph. And I think they live pretty well, because every photo you see, these guys are built, man. They're scrawny Aboriginals here. These guys are built. They're getting protein and fat and lots of good dietary stuff. I just thought I'd throw this up. This is their old sea level graph And as you can see, 5,000 years ago when they first moved onto this island, sea level was about 30 metres lower than it is now, 100 feet. But the first non-Aboriginal person to see this was this fella, James Cook, not Captain Cook, by the way. He never made captain, he was a lieutenant. Captain was his job. And then we had Matthew Flinders came along. Cook, by the way, called it Indian Head. Flinders called it Great Sandy Island, pretty good name for it. And then in about 1836, this bloke came along, and his name was Fraser, but it wasn't named after him. He was in a shipwreck, and we'll talk more about that. Unfortunately, he had his nutjob wife with him, Eliza Fraser, and that's what it was named after. And this girl was a piece of gear, let me tell you. But anyway, we'll get more of that in a bit. Well, folks, Gari. What's this bloke got to do with it? Andrew Petrie. Well, Andrew went up there and said, hey, this place got some really good timber. Not much happened. It was gazetted as an Aboriginal reserve in 1860. Then Pettigrew went up and said, hang on a minute, there's a shitload of timber up here. So they took it back, most of it, and shafted the native people as usual. There was a serious industry up here. They had railway lines, there's some nice timber. From the late 1800s right up till after the war, they were still pulling timber out of this place because it had amazing timber, tall, resilient Australian timber. And this is no negative reflection on the men who work there. The guys cutting those trees down, they're feeding their families like everyone else. Obviously, eventually it stopped because it became a national park. What were they after? Well, this thing, the Kauri pine for starters. 30 to 60 metres tall and straight. You saw those logs before on those trains. Also these things. These are santonate trees, and also known as the Fraser Island serpentine tree. This is a place called Pile Valley. You should visit this, it's awesome. So who was doing this? Well, lots of people were doing it. I'm focusing on this company and this man. These people, just after the turn of the century, put jetties in and railway lines in. They needed timber because they were from Sydney, lots of timber. But you get a lake named after you, Lake Mackenzie. And let me tell you, this place is heaven on a stick. It just is. There's nothing to say. The water is so clear. It's such a beautiful place to swim. Just astounding. Go to Fraser Island. You've got to go to Lake Mackenzie, now known as Barangora, or was always known as Barangora, now known as Barangora. And this is the guy. Through no fault of his own, he's just there to exploit timber. And the timber thing came to an end because, of course, the timber. However, Fraser Island, Guru, was one of the first places we tried to reforestate kauri. They planted 28,000 kauri seedlings up there in 1884. Wasn't completely successful because they had a lot to learn, but they had a go. And the kauri is regrowing up there, and in 200 or 300 years we might have some mature trees. Anyway, let's move on. What's the next thing we tried to exploit on this island? Well, we'll give the seafood in this because that's a whole video. The next thing we had to go at was, of course, sand mining. Let's see what happened there. So, sand mining, here it is. Unfortunately, as you can see, you don't just walk along with a sand vacuum cleaner and vacuum up the sand beneath the trees. But anyway, what are we looking at? Well, this is limonite. We talked about this when we did that big crater up in central Queensland. This is what they were mining there, limonite silt. But at Gari, here it is in the beach. And it's also Stradbroke Island, by the way, and Moreton Island, and Bribie Island. And you've seen it on beaches if you've been there. You see this black stuff. Don't let your kids eat it. Try not to breathe it. It's safe enough when it's there, but as you'll see, it's quite radioactive. So limonite ends up like this, nice rock in the ground. It gets pulverised and it's heavy. It's heavy because it contains thorium, which is very heavy. So it ends up in layers like this. You see it in the beaches. And they mine it. And they get out of it, they get several products. The first product they get out is limonite. then they get rutile, which is limonite and rutile both produce the same mineral. They contain titanium oxide, and it's refined to look like this. It does look like sugar, and they do use it in food, but it is not. And titanium oxide, well, what can we do with that? Well, we do use it in paint colouring and things like this, but we can also make this with it, titanium metal, which is just fantastic. One thing I miss about being in the Air Force is working with this metal. It's just fantastic. And of course you can make these, $100 million shit boxes if you want to. I don't like things that are designed to kill people, but they are awesome machines. But as I got pointed out in my last video about titanium, you can also make these wonderful things and change people's life positively. It's your choice, I suppose. So the problem is, of course, it's mixed in with a lot of sand, and you've got to dig holes and destroy very precious and very fragile ecosystems. And Fraser Island at Gari was mined. It was mined from 1948 and it got stopped in 1976. And I'll tell you a bit about that in a minute, but let's have a look. Here's an area that was mined. Sorry about the quality of these images, but they're absolute garbage. And you can see it is fairly destructive. They get into it. They really do. Now, I've done some Queensland Globe stuff here, and you can see the area. And yeah, look, it has recovered, but that was 1976. Lots of time for anything that relied on that environment to go extinct. Anyway, has it recovered? You can't tell from the satellite. You got to go and have a look. So let's find out why we stopped sand mining. So here we go. Joe Bielke Peterson, Ron Cam, and Big Russ in the background there, trying to mine, keep mining, don't want to stop, want to destroy Fraser Island, which is what it would have done. And of course, this bloke, his name is, of course, Kevin Newman. He was the federal minister for the environment at the time. Some environmentalists took the federal government to court and they won. Kevin Newman gets on the phone, says, Joe, it's over, no more export licences, it stops in 1976. And he was, of course, Campbell Newman's father. Campbell Newman's mother was also a senator, I might add. Anyway, let's go on and look at some more nut jobs. Just goes to show you how good these Aboriginal... This is the guy whose family, in his family name, everything was done to these people's ancestors, and mine, by the way, in Northern Ireland. So I don't have any time for him either. But anyway, this guy, he's not a bad bloke. He's just a bit of a lad, I think. But he was up on Gari about 6 or 7 years ago, just before COVID. Well, folks, that brings us to this little nut job, Eliza Fraser. Had a pretty hard time. Got shipwrecked with a husband. They both made it to shore. He was injured, and he died later on of his injuries, or he got speared, or whatever. She changed her story all the time. But the Butchalla people picked her up and some of her co-survivors and looked after them and took them slowly down to Hook Point, where they met up with an ex-convict who took them down and met up with some officials, troopers on down Double Island Point, and she was taken back to safety. And of course she told stories about how the Aboriginals brutalised her and raped her and blah-de-blah-de-blah. And of course the story changed every time. She ended up scrounging £400, which is a lot of money, out of some people in Sydney, secretly married a captain in Sydney, made her way back to England, and then tried to scrounge some money off the English Parliament. And they told her to get nicked, so she ended up basically travelling around fairgrounds in England telling her story and changing it every time. Very incoherent. The other people that were rescued had no such problems. So unfortunately those stories emboldened the colonialists to treat Aboriginals like garbage, and they're probably responsible for, there were quite a few massacres of Aboriginal people on and around Fraser Island, and that hatred stemming from her bullshit probably triggered quite a bit of it. However, had she just hung around, she could have made some money out of the movie rights. Yes, they made a movie. Now, I warn you, there's some nudity in there. You don't get nudity in T-Rock's videos very often, but there is in this, all right? So hang in there. It's not much, but it's pretty mild by today's standards, actually. But let's have a look at this. And by the way, I'll warn you, you will never get, if you watch this movie, you will never get that hour of your life back. It is absolute garbage. Factually, historically, it's supposed to be a comedy. It's unbelievably bad, but it exists. Let's have a look at it. Well, folks, here we go. The Adventures of Eliza Fraser. Yes, I know you're having trouble believing what you're seeing, but that's what they did. It gets worse. Let's just go down. Sorry about that. Let's just go down and see who's in this. Rob, you'll find this interesting. Everyone's in it. I mean, everyone is in it. The Rollicking Adventures. And of course, guess who else is in it? Abigail, looking unbelievably cute, I might add. But you know, if Abigail's in it, you know what's going to be in it within about 30 seconds. Exactly. And here we are. She's got her shipwreck dress on here. I think this was actually shot on Fraser Island or Gurry, but yeah, it's certainly in the creek. Looks like Eli Creek. Here she is, got them all out, being one of the ladies there at the native. Sorry, it's just so bad. It's probably all right to watch because it's just so bad. Here she is, up to her whatever's in water. Yeah, not me. Saltwater crocodiles up there. Give that a miss. And here she is again. The Aboriginals mistreating her. Terrible the way they did that. Anyway, the fact that she survived, they could have just killed her and left her any time. And this is the Spanish version, which I think's even better. Yeah, it's garbage, but it might be watchable. That's subjective. That's up to you. But you have been warned. Well, everyone, that's your lot. Amazing movie. Gerard Kennedy's in it, by the way, from Division 4 and Homicide, and Gus Mercurio's in it. It's just amazing. Anyway, thank you to all the new subscribers. I do appreciate you, and I've got some more coming up, Cabbage Tree Creeks, etc. Working on that now. So anyway, keep rocking. T-Rocks out.